In this section, I'm going to be talking about how the nervous system and chemoreceptors control the process of breathing. This is a really short and to the point summary. I'm leaving out some big things, but I want to just give you some main points that connect with some things we've talked about before. So this will give you enough to at least have some appreciation for what controls breathing. When we get to nervous system, we're going to talk a little bit more about how the brain controls all sorts of different things. But here's a little preview. There is a part of the brain that is called the respiratory control center. And you'll see where it is when we get to brain. But there's some tissue in the brain called the respiratory control center. And it's in that part of the brain that the rate and the depth of our breathing is controlled. So we do not have to be awake, fortunately, or else we'd be in big trouble, that our brain takes care of our breathing. And if, we need to breathe faster or slower or deeper, that's all controlled by that respiratory control center. Now, we know that the respiratory control center can be influenced by voluntary control because my brain's telling me to breathe at a certain rate, but I can also interrupt that breathing and talk. Talking, disrupts that. So we have some ability to voluntarily override the respiratory control center. In fact, if I want to take a deep breath, I can do that because I can override that respiratory control center. But the respiratory control center is our default. It's going to keep us going in between the times that we're planning on controlling our breathing. And even sometimes when we want to control our breathing, the respiratory control center can take over. And I'll show you that in a second. One of the things that interacts with the respiratory control center are things called chemoreceptors. These are proteins in some of our blood vessels. And again, I know which blood vessels, but I'm not going to make you remember it, okay? But some of our blood vessels, like a good example is your carotid arteries. Right in your neck along your trachea, on either side of your trachea, lateral to your trachea, you can feel your two carotid arteries. There's chemoreceptors in there. These are cells that have protein receptors on them, and they can sense pH. Now, we talked about pH earlier in the semester. Hopefully you remember blood pH should be between, see if you remember, 7.35 to 7.45. Lower than pH 7 is considered acidic. Above 7 is considered basic. Okay. So there's these receptors in some of our blood vessels that can detect the pH of the blood. If carbon dioxide gets high, our pH drops. Now we're going to talk about this in lab, so you'll hear about this again. So I want you to remember this. If carbon dioxide gets high, so think about where do we have carbon dioxide? Let's see, we breathe in oxygen, and then the oxygen goes into our lungs, to our blood, to our cells. Our cells do cellular respiration, use the oxygen, and our cells make carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide goes from our cells to our blood to our lungs, and we exhale it. So carbon dioxide is a waste product. Turns out when you mix carbon dioxide in water, like inside our body, you get carbonic acid. Carbon dioxide, the waste product from cellular respiration, plus the water in our body, creates acid. So it creates carbonic acid. So acid pH drops. Acidic pHs are low. So what happens is these chemoreceptors are always checking our blood pH. Is the blood pH getting a little bit low? If your blood pH gets low, and it does all the time, it gets minutely low, it's going to trigger your respiratory control center to breathe more. So what you can do is you can try it. I think I'm going to override my respiratory control center and hold my breath. So try holding your breath. We all know we can only do it for a certain period of time. And what's going to happen is as you're holding your breath, the pH of your blood is going to drop. Now, normally we can exhale carbon dioxide. So that gets rid of the extra carbon dioxide. It gets rid of and ultimately prevents the formation of carbonic acid in our blood. And our pH is good. But if we hold our breath, we're going to get a backup of carbon dioxide in our blood, and our pH is going to drop. And it happens fast. We can only hold our breath for a short period of time because we're accumulating too much carbon dioxide, which is going to cause our pH to drop. And what's that going to do? It's going to trigger this respiratory control center in our brain to say, I am overriding your voluntary choice to hold your breath, and I'm forcing you to make a breath. So our respiratory control center can override our voluntary effort to hold our breath, which is a good thing. Now think about if you're choking and you can't take a breath. Well, your pH is dropping. So now you're not getting oxygen, your cells can't generate ATP, and your pH is dropping, which is throwing off your metabolism. That's a catastrophic failure to homeostasis. So, and that's why it kills you, not being able to breathe. So just the really quick, simple thing about how we are triggered to breathe, our respiratory control center in our brain controls rate and depth of breathing. Chemoreceptors monitor CO2 levels. High CO2 causes low pH and triggers us to breathe. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. There's the check your progress. Explain why chemoreceptors are important. Describe the importance of the respiratory control center in the brain and why it's not possible to hold your breath for more than a few minutes. I think you can do that.